name's Hannah. That's me with a lot more hair, my twin sister Mia, and my abuelo Felix. I'm a second-generation American and a third-generation entrepreneur. Felix was born in Cuba. Before the Communist Revolution, my abuelo owned his own engineering firm. When the government closed it down, he and the family made the decision to leave their home country to pursue the American dream. A story powered by freedom and offering upward social mobility through hard work, perseverance, and opportunity of free enterprise. A new chapter of the American dream is being written at this very moment. But first, let's set the record straight. The Latino and Hispanic population in the United States accounts for $2.3 trillion in economic activity. That's the 8th largest economy in the world. College graduation rates for Latinas have increased more quickly than any other group of women. And in recent years, the numbers of Latino-owned businesses have increased more than any other marginalized group. Latinos of the United States are writing the next chapter of the American dream. Women of color starting their own business is very much my business. No, really, it's literally my business. It's what I do at my company, Woke Space Marketing. Through this business, I mentor and coach young women, a strong majority of them women of color, to start their own business and create successful and profitable revenue streams through smart and savvy marketing. I started Woke Space Marketing because I didn't see the opportunity I felt I deserved working for someone else, and I wanted to help others like me create this kind of opportunity for themselves too. When I started my business, I was college educated, I was bright, I was strategic, and I was ready for a bigger challenge. I've always been ready for a bigger challenge, maybe to my own detriment at times. But I learned quickly, and I had been humbled by the real world, and still I was motivated enough, or maybe just arrogant enough, to start my own business. Before I get ahead of myself, let's talk about Latinas in the traditional workplace. Latinas face an intersection of discrimination, both discrimination based on gender and based on race. In the workplace, that translates to making less money. You probably know the often quoted statistic that Latina women make 54 cents on the dollar of their white male counterparts. Women of color are undervalued in more ways than compensation. If you type in nearly any industry into a Google search next to women of color discrimination, there's the evidence. I say this from experience, even from a young age. I started working at 16 and I worked every job since. At my first job, which was a part-time retail kind of deal, I was denied a raise even after meeting or surpassing every expectation set before me. I was consistently tasked with more than my coworkers, especially those who were men, and held to a higher standard without compensation or recognition. After a conversation with my managers, I quit that job a few weeks later due to poor treatment from management. At another part-time job in high school, I worked as a hostess at an upscale restaurant where, after working for a couple of months, I trained 3 skinnier and blonder hostesses armed with club dresses and better makeup, coincidentally the same girls that asked to cheat off my homework in math class, before I mysteriously stopped being scheduled for shifts. When I showed up for my next shift, the restaurant's owner's 13-year-old niece was at the hostess stand, and the manager on duty told me he was told I had quit, which I ended up doing that day. In college, I worked as a camp counselor one summer where I got a stronger reprimanding for talking with a coworker after lights out than the male counselor who had sexually assaulted a female counselor during our time off. We lived and worked in a remote location with no way to leave the camp outside of scheduled field trips, and after the assault, we still had months to go before we were set to go home. I have a story like this for nearly every one of my employers. But instead of focusing too much on the limitations due to systemic oppression, I want to share more about the strengths within my community. I find that narratives about women of color are ones of oppression and feeling trapped within our identities. Often the occasions for celebrating women of color are surrounding our stories of struggle. Today I want to share with you the vibrancy and the strength of our communities. But first, you need to understand the final piece in this puzzle of my decision to leave behind the traditional workplace and start my business. Like many women of color, I was drawn to the nonprofit sector after college. I'm an activist at heart, and I thought nonprofit work would bring me closer to helping and advocating for marginalized communities. Instead, I found myself burnt out from the inherent oppression built into nonprofit work. It is known that folks don't go into nonprofit work for the money, but I didn't know I'd find myself without health insurance, working 4 jobs, barely staying off food stamps, and hardly paying my bills. At work, I was discouraged from seeking advancement while simultaneously encouraged to pursue larger projects on behalf of the organization. 1 year in, I was tasked with designing, launching, and managing an entirely new program without any additional compensation. I was told to put my other projects, which I had been hired to do, had created entirely on my own, and that I loved, on hold, despite them bringing in 20% of the organization's revenue that fiscal year. I was told this was a promotion. So when my career didn't seem to be panning out the way I had imagined, and I took a look around and saw the implicit and explicit bias in the people meant to be my advocates, my mentors, my leaders, I decided to take full control of my own story, and I knew I had a choice to make. I've always known and advocated for my worthiness, ever since I was 16 at my first job. I chose to advocate for myself by quitting this job and starting my business. And I'm in great company. 64% of new businesses started last year are owned by a woman of color, and Latina-owned businesses are growing at a 10% rate, outpacing the United States economy growth rate 3 times over. This has everyone wondering, why do Latinas start their own businesses? Okay, so remember that American dream bit? The story of any American dream usually starts with an individual experiencing oppression who is seeking to liberate themselves from this constraint. For my abuelo, it was the confines of communism. Now, for many women of color, it's the oppressive systems of intersecting sexism, racism, and xenophobia in our country. The catalyst is often a feeling of being undervalued and of poor treatment, much like my own experience. The risk just doesn't seem like a risk to this population of highly talented, resilient, and motivated individuals. The real risk is letting all of this potential go to waste. Starting your own business can seem like the only option, especially for immigrants with language barriers and fewer professional connections, and can provide an opportunity to steer around the traditional barriers of entry to the workplace. There's great power in being able to support yourself, especially when no one is willing to give you a job worthy of your capabilities. Immigrants aren't here to take your jobs. They're busy creating their own. In my work, when I ask women of color why they want to start a business, they usually tell me first about their desire to give to their community before they tell me about the oppression they have personally faced leading up to this decision. There are inherent strengths and opportunities with being part of a growing community of resilient, creative, and motivated entrepreneurs of color. Speaking as a Latina, I can tell you there is a strong importance placed on community care within Latinx and Hispanic culture. This stems from a collective effort to combat historic and ever-present oppression. For example, when I started my business, I experienced an outpouring of support from my community. From referrals to kind words of encouragement to expressions of pure excitement to see someone like me, someone like us, doing the damn thing. When I learned I would be speaking here for TEDx, I practiced this speech in front of dozens of Latinx folks, a mix of family and friends, and probably half were practically strangers I had met through online spaces surrounding Latina identity. I practiced with them because this is their story too, and they listened because it's their story too. However, oftentimes the stories shared about Latinx and Hispanic issues are pigeonholed to immigration. When we discuss Latinx folks in labor, this persistent issue of immigration makes it seem as though Latinx folks are here solely as imported labor. Over the past 10 years, the number of Latino business owners grew 34% compared to the national average of 1%. Limiting Latinx representation in the media to issues of immigration hardly leaves room for celebration of the immense contributions we make to the economic well-being and flourishing culture of this nation. Many Latina-owned businesses are intentionally kept small through a new concept of sidepreneurship, entrepreneurship of side businesses to supplement full-time career income. Perhaps these side businesses are intended as a safety net, something to make up for the 46 cents on the dollar we don't typically make as brown women. But not all of these businesses are kept small intentionally. Women of color are facing a different glass ceiling in starting their own business. External funding is seen as essential to scale a business, and there is a large funding gap for women of color entrepreneurs. Most women of color end up self-funding their businesses because of the difficulty to secure funding. Only 0.2% of venture capital goes to women of color. For the fastest growing and single most entrepreneurial community in this country, we need to do better. After facing a systemic failure and opting into entrepreneurship, Latinas now stare down the obstacle of funding their dreams with virtually no external resources available. With a growth rate that far exceeds expectation and surpasses all other rates, the resiliency of these business owners and our success we have found with so little, imagine what we could do if we were given the resources and support given to those with stagnant growth, with less tenacity, and those who have accomplished less with more. Latinas are at the forefront of today's entrepreneurship. We are simultaneously joining in on and creating a new world of opportunity, and we need resources to make space for success. In this new chapter of the American dream, we need our stories told, we need them to be heard, and we need them to be amplified. Thank you for listening to our story.